America is shaped by the movement of people from across the country and around the world, in our history and our future. From north, south, east, and west, artists and thinkers are bringing new perspectives to our stories of belonging, migration, and America's legacy. Through artwork and conversation, we can understand where we come from and what weaves us together, and envision what can become of us.
Funding for this program was provided by the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies.
This program takes inspiration from So I Told Her I Was Half Indian by Chicanx and Punjabi American weaver Kira Dominguez Hultgren. The piece includes multiple looms woven together, drawing on the different weaving traditions from the artist's multi-ethnic heritage.
Kira Dominguez Hultgren studied post-colonial literature at Princeton University and studio arts and visual and critical studies at California College of the Arts. Dominguez Hultgren weaves with the material afterlife of a so-called multiracial family: Chicanx, Indigenous, Indian, Hollywood Hawaiian, Brown, Black. When not in the studio, Dominguez Hultgren teaches weaving as an assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in Fiber and Material Studies. Fareed Haque is a modern guitar virtuoso and the co-director of the Chicago Immigrant Orchestra. Steeped in classical and jazz traditions, his unique command of the guitar and different musical styles inspire his musical ventures with tradition and fearless innovation. The Chicago Immigrant Orchestra is a 20-piece ensemble drawn from Chicago's immigrant communities, weaving together diverse musical heritages from across the globe.
I have always thought of myself as somewhat ethnically diverse. My father is from Pakistan, but when he was born in Pakistan, it was actually India, right? And then my mother is from Chile. Turns out my grandfather on my mother's side was Spanish, and my grandmother was Mapuche, which is actually Comanche. When we did the test, it turns out that I'm actually part Comanche. So all this life I thought I was a foreigner, but I'm actually more American than most Americans. So. Tell us about your heritage, because I read in the bio and it's like, wow, that's a lot of names.
Yeah, no, like you, Fareed, my heritage is hard to pin down. It changes, I think, with every new generation, sort of uncovering truths about what the past generation was really allowed to embody in their life experience. So, for instance, one anecdote is I grew up believing that I was Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian. My grandmother's name was Levi. She would present by dancing the hula for you if you had met her. Her family performed as Hawaiians in the movies, and then what got confusing was that they then married Native Hawaiians. So then the sort of fiction actually became reality, and part of that fiction, that sort of identity in my grandmother's generation, was because miscegenation laws, right? It wasn't okay for her parents to be who they were and to be married, and so they invented identities. She later married a Punjabi and wanted to, a Punjabi immigrant in Canada, wanted to have what she said, kids who were mostly something. And so after sort of growing up between so many cultures herself, she brought in another one for her children and raised them in India, in England, in Canada, in the United States. Wow. And so, yeah, so my mother was sort of first generation, but not really. If it went from her mother's side of the family, they'd been here for a very long time. So yeah, and then that's just one side of the family.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And I think what's fascinating is, to me, how, I don't know about for you, but for me as a child, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where I fit in. Yeah. You know, I remember taking an Iowa Basics test, and my teacher in 1979 was African American. When you think about that time, 1969, I take it back, 69, she was African American, and I said, Miss Teacher, do I put white, black, or Asian here? And she said, put white. With good reason, probably at that time, but I looked in the mirror and I was very confused, you know. Yeah. And it seems to me that this is how we sort out so many of these threads in our threads. That was accidental, and I didn't practice that.
weaving metaphors are always accidental nowadays.
Right. So I told her I was half Indian, right? Who is her?
So this is an anecdote actually from my daughter who's here today. She's going into her senior year in high school, but we moved to Chicago for the job that I have at the Art Institute. So she started her junior year, and part of her experience has been at a new school, and part of her experience has been having to explain this kind of identity that is so hard to sort of identify or put into a short answer, especially, you know, imagine a 17-year-old is not looking for a 5-minute description of genealogy. And so, so she sort of gave up and is like, well, so I told her I was half Indian when she came home, and she's like, but really that's your story. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's true. But that was so much my experience, that sort of constant question of where are you from, which I always felt like when I was introducing myself anywhere, I was always starting with my parents and grandparents, and then finally maybe I'd say something about my own life. But
yeah, it does. We often frame ourselves in terms of our roots more than other people who might have a more monoculture background are accustomed to. You know, after a while, it became, you know, where are you from? I said, well, I'm from Chicago. Yeah. I said, well, where are you really from? And I'm like, well, my mother is from Chile, my dad's from Pakistan, but I'm from Chicago. And I say that not only because, and I feel like this is true on the West Coast as well, and certainly in Hawaii, that there's such a bed of cultures in these communities that, at least in Chicago, I feel more comfortable, and in certain urban environments feel more comfortable because I know that everybody's a mess. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Chicago is one of these wonderful places that just has so many internal stories of migration, which we hear about in some of these artworks just within the United States, coming up from the South, going toward the West, as well as then I grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland and Berkeley, California. And that too, again, there's so much kind of like landing and coming to the United States, both across the U.S. as well.
I mean, I just taught in Berkeley for a week. I was there all week, and I was amazed at how much it felt like Europe. It was very interesting. There was so many little things that you've seen, the kind of cafes.
Which part of Europe?
Well, the sketchy part.
The best parts of Europe.
Oh yeah, which are the sketchiest parts. So tell us a little bit about this work of art and some of the different influences that culturally and technically come out of this piece.
Yeah, so when Stanford commissioned me to do this project, I was really excited because it gave me an opportunity to think about just this question, the where are you from question, and how does that answer, and those kind of pauses, and also the sort of untruths or the sort of survival strategies, probably is a better way to say it, that my own family had experienced and that I grew up with, right? In seeing like how people answer that question, and especially today with so much contention around Latinx demographic checkboxes, moving from an ethnic category, moving from a racial category to now ethnic. Now you mark your race within, you know, whereas Asian American is still a race. It's all very, you know, like, it's nonsensical, but it's also interesting for me from a historical point of view to sort of be able to sort some of the family stories that I heard and inherited then growing up. Like, there's reasons why my grandma thought she was Hawaiian. And so with this piece then, I had a conversation with ChatGPT, and if you've read anything in the news lately, it didn't go delusional. But it was very much like, for me, this opportunity to sort of use ChatGPT almost the same way that you would sort of take a cultural kind of like test of like, where are people at sensibility-wise with some of these questions of demographics. And so I asked, like, okay, if you could imagine what a fabric would look like, what a pattern would look like in the 1920s of somebody who is trying to pass as Hawaiian, but is not actually Hawaiian, what would that fabric look like? And then in the 1960s, okay, now imagine that person is passing as mostly Punjabi or Indian. What does that fabric look like? And now imagine what it looks like for that person in the 1990s to be mostly Mexican American or Chicana. Like, what does that look like? And so all of the fabrics to me at the end of the day looked totally like a Kleenex box wrapper. Like, it's all kind of this like soft exoticism or primitivism that's like has very obvious sort of symbols, you know, like the hibiscus flower or the elephant, or, you know, like things that are just almost too easy. So then it was like, well, can I challenge this conversation a little bit and do some research into my own family's weaving history of weaving duri rugs or datis. They're these tapestry woven rugs from Punjab that my aunt was weaving in the 1930s. And the thing that's really surprising about it for me was a lot of this blue and white motif you can see in this piece over here and in the very sort of bold blue and white stripes behind me. The patterning is often associated more with like what I would consider like Mexican tapestry sorts of weave patterns, where it's saltillo stripes, saltillo stars, but these patterns are appearing in India in a totally different context. And so like, what does that history also tell us? And realizing that actually ChatGPT has a really hard time, generative AI has a hard time creating vertical zigzag stripes that are offset because our branding doesn't use a lot of that. It's mostly horizontal, and there's loom technology that kind of explains a lot of that. And I'm a very big loom nerd. And for me, a lot of the weaving metaphors, like the World Wide Web, or like, you know, the ways that we talk about strands or threads, it goes back to this idea of how information gets structured, or demographics, or these like, how do we categorize things? How do we create a community fabric out of that? And so, yeah.
Coming back to how we categorize ourselves as cultures, ethnic groups, races.
Right.
You know, and all the history and all the sad history that's come from those arbitrary designations.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
I look at this and you know, part of me sees sort of a, you know, Chicano-Mexican weaving culture, and then I see some of the South Asian influences in there as well. And it comes to mind because I play music in a group with a Serbian guitarist, and we love playing together. And what we realize is that we're all gypsies. Mm-hmm. That the gypsy started in Rajasthan, yep, the Romani people, and they came over through Central into the Balkans, right? Eventually to Spain, and then through Spain to South America and Central America. There are strands of this culture that are everywhere, and they keep popping up, and it's great to see them come together and how powerful they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think immigrants especially resonate with these stories of movement, cultures of movement, versus cultures that are fixed or try to like create home as one location, versus appreciating that home is this constant sort of movement of creating community with whoever you happen to be with at that moment.
And I think there's a popular myth that I think it's our job as artists and even as an audience of this kind of art to bust wide open. There is no monoculture. Yeah. It doesn't really ever exist. Yeah. There's a very short period of time where Rome was only Romans. But, you know, 1,800 years of Roman Empire, so many different cultures going through that, you know. and it's just amazing to me how powerful this intermingling of cultures is, and how absolutely evocative that beautiful work is.
Thank you.
And you can't just say, oh, that's Celtic art. Because even Celtic art, you go back, you go,
right,
well, that's
totally.
this and that and
Yeah.
that. You know, these are all amalgams of culture.
And part of what I like to do in my work with weaving especially is bring the loom into the actual piece. And so what you're seeing in this piece is actually 3 different kinds of looms coming together at once. And not necessarily as a way of stepping through technology, but trying to show the way that technology plays off of one another. It's sort of not a clear distinction,
right,
where one stops and where one starts. And so, yeah.
Yeah. It's cool because you can see the architecture of it.
Right.
Well, I think it's time for us to move on here. Thank you, Kira, so much. It was incredible. Thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce our panel's moderator. Brian Lowery is the Walter Kenneth Kilpatrick Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford University and one of the founding faculty co-directors of the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies. He received his doctorate in social psychology from UCLA in 2001 and has been on faculty at Stanford since 2002. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Sarah. Good evening. So I'm happy to introduce the panelists for today. So I'll start with Professor David Blight. David Blight is the Sterling Professor of History and Director of the Gilder Leman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition at Yale University. And David has written, co-written, or edited over a dozen books, including Yale and Slavery, A History, which is a narrative study of Yale's historic involvement and association with slavery and its aftermaths, and Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. David has been awarded numerous prizes, including the Bancroft Award, Abraham Lincoln Prize, the Frederick Douglass Prize, and not last or least, the Pulitzer Prize. Bonnie McDonald is a thought leader and national voice connecting preservation to support climate change mitigation, public health, housing, and social justice. She was awarded the James Marston Fitch Charitable Foundation's 2020 Mid-Career Fellowship, which culminated in her book, The Relevancy Guidebook, How We Can Transform the Future of Preservation. And finally, Siying Qu is a creative consultant and fashion designer known for blending cultural storytelling with future-facing design. As a co-founder of Private Policy, she spent over a decade crafting genderless collections rooted in social topics ranging from Asian youth identity to environmental justice and AI's impact on humanity. So I'm going to start with an easy question. This is about how is America woven together by migration? So my first question is, David, I'm going to go to you first. What is America? There's more. Well, hold on. Today, there's been conversation about, is America a place, right? So our Vice President, J.D. Vance, has been very vocal in saying, it's about where you are. If you've been here longer, you're more American. There's also the concept long held that America is an idea. So when we think about America, what makes America America? When we talk about weaving together America, what is America? David?
Well, I lean more toward the idea than I do to the vice president. You brought him up, I didn't. He has a lot to learn about American history. It's a massively complex, beautifully pluralistic, bewilderingly diverse, often deeply conflicted, fascinating, incredible country in trouble.
Okay. Bonnie?
Oh, I have to follow that?
Yes.
David.
I left a lot out.
Oh, all right. Well, David put it very well. I agree with all of those, but let me add to it that Kira's piece, when I saw it for the first time, was emblematic to me of America, because I think of it as a woven piece in this way. So as Kira said, there's the warp, the up and down, the threads that are about our idealism, the idea of America being a place for everyone, being a place where we can be free, where we can have justice, where we're all treated the same, where we can participate in our democracy, where everyone has the ability to have a voice, and we're not going to be demonized for that. But then there's the reality. That's the weft. So the warp is what holds us together when we weave it with the reality of trying to achieve that idea. Because that's the pluralism and the duality, is that this complex and often fraught, messy, chaotic process that we go through is about how we try to make the idea of America real. And if we forget that, if we sanitize it, if we whitewash it, then we've essentially only had one set of threads for this country.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think, I come here as an immigrant. So for me, America really symbolizes that dream. So I think, but at the same time, I think if we take into more international point of view of America, it's such a unique opportunity. And then think about all the art and design created within this country because of the cultural backgrounds and also all the migration history of this country. And that's why I think American culture in modern sense is one of the very unique ones that resonates when it goes to a lot of places in a quick way. Like, because it is a blend of so many things and people feel more open to it. So it would be really sad to see if not only this idea that America marketed itself as is disappearing, but also that connection with the world, that unique one country that can connect with so many different cultures when you go to interact. That would be a really loss for the world as well.
So you think it would be a, yeah. That's an interesting answer, because you pointed to how America has marketed itself, right? So the image of America that's been propagated around the world, if that goes away, is that a loss?
The marketing?
Yeah, the idea of America that's been spread around the world, not, I mean, we can talk about what America is, and we can also talk about how America is presented to the world. If the idea that has been presented around the world goes away, and this is, I think, Siying was pointing to, is that a loss?
Yes, and one need only live abroad for a year or teach abroad for a year if you are born here, and I've done that twice, to realize you learn a lot about who you are when you are not here, when you see yourself through others' eyes. There are also, of course, moments in history when the United States was indispensable to the world. There are also times in history when the United States was an imperial power and did great damage to other cultures, peoples, nations. That's a very mixed story, but the world has needed us. It needs us now, not just our technology, not just our, our airplanes, our bunker busters. It needs our almost endless curiosity and creativity in programs like the Fulbright program, like all the international programs we've had, send Americans abroad and bring others here. If we lose that, we will be losing any kind of leadership in an absolutely global world. And some of that leadership comes with responsibility. I would just add one quick thing to this definition. We're also this crazy quilt of cultures that has to live under law. We have a constitution. It's not functioning very well. And Tocqueville, in Democracy in America, said, if you don't have law, all you have is culture. And when you only have culture, that usually leads to conflict. Cultures need structures under which to live. And we may be losing much of that structure.
Thank you. Let me,
we weren't supposed to proselytize here, but maybe I did. Sorry.
So Bonnie, this one is for you. America's a woven together patchwork, whatever metaphor you want to use, but it's been constructed, you'd argue, by immigrants, as we now understand it. Can you tell us, how do you think about what America's become because of migration? So internal and external, like how should we think about how migration has constructed America as we understand it?
Yeah, as we were preparing for this, we were talking about migration versus immigration, or migration and immigration, and that they are different. There's the movement of people within this place that we share together, the borders of this place, and then there are those who come, and many have come, but thinking about that not everybody chose to migrate. There have been those who were forced to migrate. Whether that be our indigenous people, we are on indigenous land right now, who were forced to move, and that changed the landscape of this place as well as the rest of our country. And also those thinking of the Great Migration, where millions and millions of Black Americans were seeking opportunity, thanks to the work of the Chicago Defender and the Pullman Porters, who spread the word about opportunity in the North, but also fleeing violence at the same time. That at times, thinking about what David just said, the propaganda, I look at this, the work that we do abroad is one part hope, one part ideal, and one part propaganda. So when people came north believing that it would be different, That in some ways was propaganda. So the cities we live in, the places that we live in have been profoundly shaped from a physical sense, from a cultural sense, by migration, and I believe it's additive. We continually reshape our environment based on our culture and our beliefs. And again, this hope and ideal that we can make a better place that we live together.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the internal migration part, because there's a lot of evidence that continues. It's not just historic. So there's work about the Katrina and how people that left Katrina propagated the styles of music in other places. There's just interesting movements of people inside the country that changes the way we live and how we think about things. And on that, this seeing it makes me think about what we produce when we move. Like, what's the role of the products, things like fashion or music or food? Like, what role does the production of art and other objects play in the evolution of America?
So I know America often is being compared to a melting pot. And I think of art and design, all these objects are what that pot is cooking, and that's the nectar come out of it. So a lot of art and design, not saying I hope for struggles, but it does come from conflicts, contrast of culture, or out of, like, in a way, disruption, something fresh and new. Because when disruption happens, when migration happens, when two groups of people meet, that kind of friction or interaction create or even force us humans to be creative, because now you cannot just go do what you usually do, you have to think creatively. And from there, I think art and design really thrives. But at the same time, I think when we think about America, it also have a responsibility as an environment to have enough safety, to have enough openness for people to really feel I have this, a safety net so I can actually create. So I think art and design also is a reflection, almost like a flex. You want to think about how well the society is doing. And then when you see art is being enriched and is being encouraged, I think that is a great, applause to a success of migration stories.
And this also makes me think about the work you do, Bonnie, because in preservation, part of what you're doing is preserving objects and art as a way of saying something about who we are and identity. So I wonder what you think about that.
Thank you. I was thinking as things talking about fashion and design, we're laying culture, really. We're talking about what people bring with us and how we make a home wherever we are. We bring a part of ourselves to what we do, and then it shapes us at the same time. So we become new people wherever we live, and then you think about bringing that forward. So in preservation, we're essentially preserving stories. We're preserving people's stories, and that may be in the physical fabric around us, but essentially the reason these places are here are to serve people and to make sure that we're understanding the history of how we came to be, the nature of the world around us, and to come back to the current administration. David, you laid the gauntlet, right? Or Brian laid the gauntlet already, is that there's an executive order that was put forward about essentially ensuring truth and sanity in history. And the process of doing that is essentially erasing a majority of this country's history to have a singular narrative about who we are. And I think migration will ensure that that doesn't happen. We can't have only one narrative of who we are as Americans.
I find that interesting, because here's something that is a tension I see. And it's come up in the previous conversation about there's no such thing as a monoculture, but at the same time, people want to claim an identity, right? And claim an identity is to say, like, I'm from this place, I'm this kind of person, here is who my people are. And there's something deeply human about the need to say, this is who I am. This is where I'm from. And these conversations about America and about migration seem to rub up against that, right? So when Kira's daughter said, like, I didn't know what to say about who I was, the reason the person is asking, because people are trying to make sense of themselves and the other people around them. And when we have this constant stew of identities, it doesn't help for people to make sense of who they are. So how should we think about the tension between maintaining a community's cultural practices, right, that they're deeply invested in, on the one hand and creating a shared American identity on the other? How do we deal with that?
Well, let's look at Kira's work again. Magnificent, Kira. And by the way, off to the sides, if you haven't been there already, are two of what she calls altars, where you can take pieces of thread and actually string them yourself and add to it. I love that you call them altars, by the way. But one of the things, Kira, I learned a long time ago not to tell an artist what they've done with their art. I mean, who are we to say, right? But one of the things I think she's doing is taking back the flag. Taking back the flag. The flag has had a sordid history, a glorious history, a troubled history. It's been burned, it's been loved, it's been found in the darndest places on planet Earth. But I think she's taken back the flag there and then weaving all of her own identities into it and then out of it, which it may be, you know, one thing, not just the flag, but there is something called America. If we can keep it, if we can keep living under a working constitution, that means something. And there are a lot of people in America right now who are looking for a voice. They're looking for ways to say, I belong, and I believe in this place, and I don't want it to die. I think Kira's taken back the flag here for multiple groups of people. And then you can find your own way into it, and you can even weave your own threads into it. Weaving, woven, I mean, yeah, the metaphors here are obvious. If America's anything, it is something that's been woven, but boy, the threads can be pulled out. Democracy can die, like the threads can be pulled out of that.
Shouldn't we have the, shouldn't we have the choice? I think what you're asking about is, are we muddying the waters if we can't have an American identity about us? And the idea, though, is Kira has the voice and the ability to say this, and she has the choice to identify how she wants to. And that hasn't always been safe to do that in American history. So I just want to say this is the complicated nature of it, is that yes, now you have the choice of how to identify, and you have the choice on how to identify.
Yeah, I would say that I find America complicated. I think human beings have a hard time with instability. And we like to have many people would like to have an American identity. That's who they are. And when you start to weave in something else into that flag, when you start to take threads out, people feel threatened and people are upset because what they are is being challenged or changed. And the question I'm kind of asking is, if America's constantly doing that, constantly pulling threads out, adding threads in, what does it mean to belong to America? What does it mean to own America? What does it mean to identify as American in that context?
When we're talking about this, I think about one of the collection we did a research on Chinese migrants who came to America building the Transcontinental Railroad. A lot of that history has been erasing their identity by literally not showing their faces. But there's something interesting about claiming your identity is still there are images out there just very far away. Imagine great American landscape of workers building railroads. You cannot see any of their faces, but then you can recognize them with their culture by them wearing a very specific shaped bamboo hat. And then, in a way, they definitely did not intentionally think about, I'm wearing this hat for my identity. But in those photos now, so many years later, when looking back, that is them claiming a place, right? Like the thread, even though one single thread, they made this brave intention, I'm here, I'm leaving a mark. But at the same time, I think that's, again, the beauty of America is that struggle. It comes from this conflict, this unique opportunity. This is even allowed as a choice for us to build a new culture of blending together. We're creating new identities, and that's something I think so precious in a way, because it's a unique opportunity.
Could we use a historical example here? I wrote a book on Frederick Douglass, so I'm always loaded with Douglass examples. Sorry about that. But in 1869, Frederick Douglass gave a speech called The Composite Nation. Composite. I won't describe it all, but it's, and note the date, it's right at the peak of Reconstruction. The 14th Amendment has been passed. The 15th Amendment is about to be passed. The United States has been reinvented in its Constitution. He was never so optimistic as this moment. And he lays out an image in one beautiful metaphor after another of this nation of multiple peoples from all corners of the world, somehow all going to live under the same Constitution. It's very idealistic. And halfway through the speech, he stops and he makes a vigorous argument for Chinese immigration, which is a huge issue at that moment. The Burlingame Treaty had just been signed in 1868. The first Chinese Exclusion Act is going to come in 1874. But Douglass says, hey, what are you worried about, America? They're coming. They're coming by the hundreds of thousands. They're going to come by the millions. Yes, they have an alien religion. He uses the word alien. Yes, they have an alien language. Yet they're very different. But they have a civilization that's 4,000 years old, and they've thought things we've never thought. Get ready, America. They're coming. And then he develops these incredible metaphors of how they're coming over the hills and the mountains and the rivers and the plains. And he uses the assimilation model. Now, not everybody believes that the full assimilation model is the way to go with these things. But he says they too will buy our creeds if we keep them alive. And then at the end, he ends with what sounds like a multiculturalism manifesto from the 1990s, you know, in a public school. We are from everywhere. We are the world. You know, and that's 1869. He never gave that speech again after the early 1870s because it just didn't fit the America that was then coming apart. The threads were coming apart after Reconstruction. But the fact that he goes to the Chinese immigration issue to make the point about the composite nationality is a fascinating move. You can pull that speech up online in 2 seconds.
Brian, can I comment? Because I think that the brilliant orators that we had in our history, the brilliant writers who could help this to be an accessible idea to people. What you just described is where we are today. That fabric and the threads are fraying because we have a group of people who don't want people to come, who don't want people here. And we are facing, go back to where we are today is a climate crisis. We will have, the people are coming. They're shifting based on the forced migration of climate change. So here in the in Chicago, around the Great Lakes, we have a fresh body of water. This place will be receiving climate migrants from other parts of the country and the world. Up to 1.6 billion people are going to be displaced by climate disasters by 2050. They are coming. And how are we preparing for people? We are in the same place we were in the 1870s.
Oh, that's encouraging, Bonnie. That's really encouraging. I thought I was a downer here.
Let's look at it I want to look at it from the other angle. I'm going to turn it around a little bit. Right. So we've been talking about how do we weave people into the existing idea of America, but now there's a lot of pressure against like appropriation, right? And there's a lot of, and I would say this is more from the progressive side actually, where there's a concern about who owns what, who gets to participate in what. And so isn't that also a challenge to this concept of America that you all are laying out? So if there's something you come over and you bring your culture with you, but it can only be yours. You can only use it. You can only borrow it. How do we weave in America in that context? I'll start with you saying on that.
Yes, cultural appropriation is a big topic in fashion because fashion love to make a mistake in that area. But at the same time, I think, I like to bring this kind of idea to a more personal level. When I think about when I share my culture is one, if I'm not telling it, who else? And also at the same time, if I'm not sharing it, then how are they gonna know? And then if I'm not welcoming some kind of interaction, then there's no weaving. I'm just a thread flying by myself. But at the same time, I think when we think about cultural appropriation, it is real. It comes from a lot of other issues. It's more based off respect and things that is not just about that specific case, about a bigger thing is come from the reason that make people angry is because it come from other places that's actually beyond just sharing. It's about you share something and someone not only, it's fine, so you don't like it, but then they disrespect it and make you feel like there's one side winning, one side losing. And when I think about a lot of this kind of interaction, I think maybe the mindset, first of all, has to change to understand no one's trying to win. No one's trying to be the biggest thread on a woven piece of fabric. It's about how we work together. And it's about another concept of how survival is not about always being the winner. It's about diversity. That actually creates this stable environment within a complex and always seemingly conflicting energy. And that diversity actually will stabilize us because that's proven by nature and we're part of it.
That's a great point about winning. How do you win with culture? It's an interesting problem.
I like the idea of the fighting to win. And I think what that brings up for me is I think in America what it means is ownership. Who owns America? Who owns this product? And how do we manage that? I'll just be honest, I don't fly the American flag often because I don't feel like the cultural messages of it are about something that I own, right? And I think that's often when you think about a flag, it's like a flag of this is me, I own this is who I am. And when you think about letting other people share your culture, who owns that? If it gets built into woven into the American flag, into the American identity, do you still own that now? Is it still Japanese or Chinese or wherever it came from? Is it Greek still? Or is it now someone else's? How do we think about that idea of ownership?
Well, historians are always fussing over this. I mean, who owns the past? Which past? My past, your past, whose past? It's come and gone as a big issue at different times. You've lived through this with preservation, I'm sure, because there you're actually talking about buildings that people own. The truth is nobody really owns the past, but we do divide it up. We divide it up by ethnicities, cultures, nation states. We can't help it. We have to have these categories. And owning is a part of instinct, probably. I mean, I don't want to say that property is an instinct, but owning something that you've created, your people have created, your family has created. You don't want people just messing it up. At the same time, maybe what they're doing is just their thing with it. It's a hard thing. Music, oh my God, the problem of appropriation in music. But without James Brown, there wouldn't be a Bruce Springsteen. Bruce said that himself. That's not my critical point of view. And without Bob Dylan, there wouldn't be a Bruce Springsteen, and so on and so on. I'm dating myself here. Sorry. For those who don't know who Bruce Springsteen is, you have a problem. We'll always have, in this kind of society, we'll always have a problem about this appropriation idea. And sometimes you just have to live and fight through it. And there have been periods in our history, the 60s into the 70s, even 80s, you know this, when everything was about appropriation. You know, blackness was blackness as it was being defined by somebody. That's blackness, that's not blackness. How do we know? Anyway, sorry, I went a little too long there. Historians are always fussing over this one, whether we should or not.
I appreciate that you brought up preservation because I think it's a microcosm of the larger conversation in some ways. And I wonder how much we can delve into the mindset that we have in this country of scarcity versus abundance. And if that has any relationship to what we're talking about, that when we live in an area of abundance, there can be more layers, there can be complications. So in my own field, historic preservation chooses which stories are going to survive, which stories we're going to tell. When we actually designate a property, when we save a property, we have to choose some language or a period of significance. Well, everybody's significant. Everybody's history is significant, but we have to say this particular period of time is what was significant, which is a scarcity mentality that says people can't understand more than this one small thing because we're deficient in our ability to think about anything that's complicated, or to be able to internalize that there were multiple layers of people here. So it's just I continue to think about how a mindset of scarcity affects everything around us. Not to be nihilistic. I'm not lacking in hope, David.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I am. Go ahead.
I think ownership is a really like IP in design and art, music, fashion, right? It's very complex. But sometimes I think about nature, we think humans today, we own Earth. That's how we think. But are we, right? When you look into mycelium, they have been around for billions and they're hiding their own, maybe more than we think we own. But then talk about sharing, talk about, art. But I think there's seemed to be a practical thing, art world figured out design, creativity, because it's so hard to own or claim a copyright, is to give credit. I mean, on the surface, it's about legals or for people's feelings, it seems. But actually, I think for the purpose of creating, at least, giving credit is to say, I know the source. And then that's important because I think the source usually is where that culture, where it's drawing from, is the most dense. And then when you don't care about the source, or you don't know the source today because of the internet, and people sometimes just see something from the end, don't even know it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. But to know that trial, to know that history, to know who owned or who were here, to recognize that's so important, because only that way you can move forward on top of it, because otherwise you just building something on top of something that's empty, that's gonna collapse, because there's nothing there. But there's a foundation. I think it's so important to draw from that source and then really stand on that foundation.
Well put. That's really great.
So we have time for one more question. If we take immigration as a given, are we doomed to conflict? One group comes into contact with another and they fight over who owns what's the source, and who gets to own this collective thing? Is that where we are? Or what is a hopeful view of what the future of America will look like? So David, we're in a particular period right now where a lot of the institutions that have sustained America are being challenged in many ways. The Constitution is, you might argue, being challenged in some ways. What is the future of America? This is for all three of you. But David, you want to go first? It's a hopeful future, because you said you weren't hopeful. I want to hear the hopeful David now.
Okay, yeah. No, I have a lot of hope. I have hope in education, if we can save it. I grew up in public schools, public universities. The most democratic institution the United States ever created is the public school. We have to preserve it. I believe in a lot of my students. They inspire me, because they're not giving up on anything. But I don't think we have to fail at this. The United States doesn't have to fail. our multi-ethnic, multicultural civilization not only doesn't have to fail, it's still a model for the world. The American university is the envy of the world. And those who want to tear them down better think twice, because it's probably the best export the United States has. We have so much energy in our intellect, in our curiosity, and it's not all in Silicon Valley. It's all over the country. Our politics is deeply troubled. But it doesn't mean this thing has to fail. The United States failed once. It's called the Civil War. We don't want this to be the 1850s again. And there's much to be learned from the 1850s. This, you know, not just because that's my field, but it's true. Some things are just true, you know? There's much to be learned from when we tore ourselves to pieces, fought an all-out, ghastly civil war, and had to reinvent the place. And then we had to reinvent it again in the 1960s. And it's going to have to be reinvented yet again. Americans love redemption. It's a huge part of our, whatever our national narrative is now. It doesn't have to fail, but we have to fight for it. And we need movements of all kinds to preserve it, save it, and reinvent it again. It does not have to fail.
I agree.
And I love preservation. That's really...
The addition I would make to that would be, in addition to our university system, the intellectual capacity that we have in our communities is the level of generosity we have in this country. We are the most generous people in the entire world. Now, there could be many reasons for that, but I like to believe it's because we all help each other. We've arrived in this place together and see an opportunity to serve. So per capita, the people who have the least in this country give the most of themselves. So I think generosity is inherent to us, and local activism. Just remember, the federal government doesn't rule everything. You know, rule. Did I choose that? Sorry. So the federal government does not choose everything for the place that we live, the places that we live. There are also local ability, local capacity to get involved and make your future. And I think that's really the hope that I have.
That's beautiful. I'm getting so excited hearing the future and the possibility, the positive side. I think, you know, people are drawn to America for a big reason. It's not easy to come to this country or even just get a visa. It's a very serious process. And then I think definitely America is this idea of innovation. A lot of bold, like crazy ideas come from America that other countries may think, like, stop, like before you even get the funding or the support. And then, so here's the question of, while maybe, yes, it is uncomfortable to feel there's always something new, there's always something that's, you know, you're conflicting, figure out our own identities, all of this. But then, you know, America have the chance to really lead the world to something that's new in a direction that can be that boldness, because this is the land that has been nurturing that kind of thinking, and that's the exciting part. So what's next, America? What, like David said, we're gonna say we're gonna give up and it's difficult, or we're gonna continue and then really bring out the best, and maybe another challenge. What's next? That's actually gonna even be better than what America has created already. And I think it's possible, yeah.
And you know, I don't know if you'll agree, but nobody loves this country like immigrants.
That's the trick.
For some obvious reasons, they're new at it.
I think there's a fundamental issue of like being human, that we create structure so that we can live together, and then all of human history is a history of people moving and bumping into each other, and cultural exchange, and tensions being built up. And you see, I think, throughout history, this kind of cyclical building of a structure, then it is overwhelmed by just the nature of human beings and their movement and creativity, and it breaks. And the only thing I think that's sad about that or scary about that is not that it happens. I think that is fine. In my opinion, that's fine and healthy. What's scary is that the breaks often look horrendous, right? So when you think about major changes in the world, you don't want to have breaks because they're terrible, but they happen, I think, because human beings you can't suppress the human desire to move. You can't suppress the human desire to create, and those things start to create tension on the systems that are designed to hold us together, to keep us in place. And so when that reaches a boiling point, you see breaks. So I don't think this moment in America is unique. And I think historically you can see this all over the world. Politics aside, you could argue that the structures we have were failing in a way that have nothing to do with the politics. They were just not, what was created wasn't able to contain what America has become. And so maybe what you're seeing is just the way that it breaks. Not that necessarily that I mean, again, you can have whatever political view you want to have about this, but I would argue that it wasn't as if it was perfect 5 years ago, right? And what we're seeing is what happens when people start to realize that this is not working. Like, and human beings, as great as they are, sometimes don't diagnose problems in ways that generate the cleanest of solutions. How about that?
You know, the Supreme Court was once a good idea.
Wow. Okay.
Coming out of the 18th century, it was unique. It was a unique American creative. It was a good idea. It's had a rocky history, but.
And with that, I'm going to thank my guests.
Funding for this program was provided by the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies.